The Great Pivot, how Britain's desperate gamble on China reveals the West's fracture in a grand hall in Beijing. As golden chandeliers cast light on centuries of Chinese imperial symbolism, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom sat across from Xi Jinping and declared that British-Chinese relations are in a good, strong place. The same China that has jailed British citizens. The same China that imposed sanctions on 9 UK The same China accused of genocide against the The same China that stands as Russia's primary enabler in its war against Ukraine. Good, strong place. Let those words sink in for a moment, because what we witnessed this week wasn't diplomacy. It was a desperate nation scrambling to salvage its geopolitical relevance as the Western alliance crumbles around it. For almost 3 hours, Sir Keir Starmer engaged with Xi Jinping in what British officials eagerly described as very warm and constructive talks. Bilateral meetings, a private a state banquet. 3 hours of a British Prime Minister seeking favor from a Chinese leader who, just moments into their meeting, took a thinly veiled swipe at Britain's previous government. China-UK relations went through some twists and turns that did not serve the interests of our countries, she told Starmer, before adding with calculated nostalgia, in the past, Labour governments made important contributions to the growth of China-UK relations. Translation: the Conservatives were difficult. You Labour types are more pliable, and she wasn't wrong. What exactly did Britain go to Beijing seeking? Tariff cuts on whisky, business deals, visa-free travel for UK citizens, intelligence sharing to combat people trafficking gangs, access to Chinese markets, renewed economic ties. Read that list again. Those aren't the demands of a global power. They're the requests of a struggling economy, desperate for crumbs from Beijing's table. Britain, the nation that once ruled a quarter of the globe, that established the gold standard, that built Hong Kong into a financial powerhouse, is now begging China to please lower tariffs on Scotch whisky. The fall from empire to supplicant has rarely been so starkly illustrated. But let's talk about what Starmer supposedly raised during those warm and constructive talks. Downing Street claims he brought up China's human rights record. He mentioned Jimmy Lai, a Hong Kong activist and British citizen, imprisoned by Beijing on charges widely condemned as politically motivated, and then Downing Street repeatedly declined to give any details of what he said. Think about that for a moment. The British government wants credit for raising these issues but refuses to actually say what was said. No quotes, no specifics, no demands, just vague assurances that, yes, these uncomfortable topics were mentioned. That's not diplomacy. That's theater, performed for a domestic audience that might wonder why their prime minister flew to Beijing to wine and dine with an authoritarian regime. Because the truth is far simpler and far more troubling. Britain needs China more than China needs Britain. Here's a detail that perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of this good, strong place. China has imposed sanctions on 9 UK parliamentarians, members of Britain's own parliament, for the crime of criticizing Beijing's treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, has refused to admit Chinese politicians to Westminster in protest over these measures. And yet, there's Starmer in Beijing, smiling for the cameras, talking about progress on the sanctions without specifying what that progress actually entails. Did China agree to lift them? No indication of that. Did they promise to reconsider? The word used was explore, diplomatic. Speak for we'll think about it, and probably do. Nothing, but there was agreement to explore more exchanges between legislators in London and Beijing. So let's be clear. Chinese officials have sanctioned British lawmakers, blocked them from entering China, and labeled them enemies of the state. And Britain's response is to explore more legislative exchanges. This isn't sophisticated diplomacy. This is capitulation with a public relations campaign. Notice what wasn't prominently featured in the official any substantial discussion of what multiple international bodies have called genocide in Xinjiang, over 1 million Uyghurs detained in re-education camps. Forced cultural erasure, mass surveillance, the systematic destruction of mosques and cultural sites. These aren't allegations from fringe activists. These are documented findings from human rights organizations, UN, and investigative journalists who've risked everything to expose what's happening. And Britain's response, during 3 hours of warm and constructive talks, was, what exactly? Downing Street won't say. They claim it was raised. They insist Starmer was firm, but there are no consequences, no demands, no conditions attached to improved relations, just whiskey tariffs and visa travel. But here's what makes this moment truly significant. Britain isn't acting out of strength, it's acting out of fear. To understand why Starmer is in Beijing kowtowing to Xi'an. Yes, that's the word the conservative opposition used. You need to understand what's happening across the Atlantic. Donald Trump has threatened to seize Greenland. He's renewed tariff threats against U.S. allies, including Britain. He's shown zero interest in maintaining the special relationship that has defined Anglo-American relations for nearly a century. The Western Alliance, which Britain helped construct in the ashes of World War II, is fracturing before our eyes, and Beijing is watching, calculating, exploiting. International law is only truly effective when all countries abide by it, and major powers, in particular, must take the lead. Otherwise, they will regress to a jungle-like world, she told Starmer. The irony is exquisite. China, which has built artificial islands in the South China Sea in violation of international law, which ignored a UN tribunal ruling on territorial disputes, which trampled the international agreement guaranteeing Hong Kong's autonomy, lecturing Britain about the importance of respecting international norms. And Starmer nodded along, because what choice does he have? Britain isn't alone in this pivot. Starmer's visit to Beijing followed Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's trip earlier this month. Germany's leaders have been making similar overtures. France has long tried to maintain independent channels to Beijing. European nations are scrambling to secure their economic interests before Trump's tariff threats become reality. She explicitly referenced this new dynamic, calling for a more reasonable global governance system, an orderly, multipolarity diplomatic code for a world where American dominance is diluted and China has expanded influence. And European leaders, terrified of being caught between an unreliable United States and an economically powerful China, are essentially agreeing the symbolism of the meeting location matters. The Great Hall of the People, the massive government building on the western edge of Tiananmen Squares where China showcases its power to visiting dignitaries. It's where Mao proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic, where the National People's Congress rubber stamps Communist Party decisions, where foreign leaders come to pay tribute to China's rise. Starmer didn't choose this location, she did, and in selecting it, he sent a message to the watching world. Britain comes to us now. We don't go to them. Compare this to past Anglo-Chinese relations. When Deng Xiaoping negotiated Hong Kong's handover with Margaret Thatcher, Britain still held leverage. It was a negotiation between powers, however, unequal. When David Cameron visited China in 2015, he at least maintained the pretense of British strength, even as he pursued closer economic ties. But Starmer in 2026, he's coming as a supplicant, hat in hand, begging for tariff cuts and business deals while his country faces economic stagnation and geopolitical isolation. And Beijing knows it. Let's return to the case of Jimmy Lai, because it perfectly encapsulates Britain's moral surrender. Lai is a British citizen. He holds a British passport. He's imprisoned in Hong Kong on charges that are transparently political, supporting pro-democracy protests and running a newspaper that dared criticize Beijing. He's 77 years old. He's been held in solitary confinement. His trial has been condemned by international legal experts as a sham. And what has Britain done? Issued statements of concern, raised the issue in meetings, expressed disappointment. But there are no consequences, no sanctions on Hong Kong officials involved in his imprisonment, no conditions placed on Britain's improved relationship with China, nothing that would actually pressure Beijing to release him. Starmer mentioned, Lai during his meeting with Xi. We know this because Downing Street told us, but what did he say? What demands did he make? What consequences did he threaten if Lai isn't freed? Silence, because Britain has already calculated that Jimmy Lai's freedom is worth less than access to Chinese markets. Buried in the official readouts is perhaps the most significant failure of the meeting. Starmer raised Russia's war in Ukraine. Of course, he ditched the defining geopolitical crisis of our time, and China is Russia's primary enabler. Beijing has provided Putin with economic lifelines, purchased Russian oil and gas, supplied dubious technologies that end up in Russian weapons systems, and offered diplomatic cover at the United Nations. Without Chinese support, Russia's war machine would grind to a halt within months. So surely, Starmer pressed Xi to use China's leverage over Putin to end the war, right? We don't know, because Downing Street refused to say whether the Prime Minister urged China to exert pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the conflict. Read that again. The British government won't even confirm whether their Prime Minister asked China to help end a war that threatens European security. Either Starmer didn't press the issue, which would be a catastrophic dereliction of duty, or he did and got such a dismissive response that admitting it would be embarrassing. Neither option is good. While Starmer was in Beijing, seeking better relations, back in London, his government approved China's construction of a massive new embassy. Critics are calling a super embassy. The Royal Docks, the facility, will be one of the largest foreign embassy complexes in the world. It will house hundreds of Chinese diplomats and staff, and it will sit in the heart of London, a physical manifestation of China's expanded influence over British affairs. The conservative opposition went ballistic. Security experts raised concerns about espionage. Human rights activists protested, but the Labour government approved it anyway, because that's what you do when you're trying to convince Beijing that Britain is a reliable partner, not a troublesome critic. The super embassy isn't just a building. It's a monument to Britain's diminished status and China's rising power. And Xi knows exactly what he's getting. One of the few concrete agreements to emerge from the meeting is an intelligence sharing pact to tackle people trafficking gangs and curtail the supply of Chinese-made small boat engines used in channel crossings. Think about what this represents. Britain, unable to control its own borders, is now dependent on Chinese cooperation to stop the flow of migrants across the English Channel. The irony is thick. Brexit was supposed to restore British sovereignty and border control. Take back control was the rallying cry. And now, 8 years later, Britain is begging China to help stop Chinese-made engines from being sold to trafficking gangs because it can't secure its own maritime borders. This isn't sovereignty. This is dependency. British officials promise that new business deals will be revealed in the coming days. Color me skeptical. These promises always follow high-level visits to Beijing. British delegations return home, claiming breakthrough agreements and transformative partnerships. And then the deals either don't materialize, or they materialize on terms heavily favorable to China, or they involve Chinese companies buying British assets and infrastructure. Remember when China was going to build Britain's 5G network? Remember when Chinese investment was going to revolutionize British infrastructure? Those deals either collapsed under security concerns or turned into cautionary tales about foreign control over critical systems. The fact that whisky tariffs are being presented as a major potential win tells you everything about Britain's diminished expectations. Scotch whisky is a significant British export to China. Yes, the industry employs thousands. Tariff reductions would help. But this is Britain's big ask. This is what Starmer flew to Beijing to secure. Lower taxes on alcohol, not technology transfers, not joint research initiatives, not infrastructure partnerships on equal terms. Whisky tariffs. It's the geopolitical equivalent of a great power reduced to selling luxury goods to a rising empire. And it's working exactly as Beijing intended. She made sure to mention that Starmer's visit, coming just before the Lunar New Year, was a sign of auspiciousness. The symbolism is deliberate. In Chinese culture, the Lunar New Year is about new beginnings, fresh starts, clearing away bad luck from the previous year. She is framing Starmer's visit as Britain clearing away the twists and turns of the conservative years and returning to the more accommodating labor approach of the past. It's a reset, but not on British terms. On Chinese terms, Britain gets to start fresh by accepting its role as a junior partner in a China-led economic order. Range far your eye over long distances, she quoted to invoking a Chinese proverb about taking the long view. It's a beautiful sentiment. It's also a trap, because what she means is, don't worry about the Uyghurs now. Don't fret over Hong Kong's freedoms today. Don't let Jimmy Lai's imprisonment distract you from the bigger picture of economic cooperation. Take the long view, and in that long view, accept that China will do what it wants domestically. While Britain focuses on securing trade deals and market access, it's asking Britain to trade its values for its interests. And based on Starmer's performance, Britain is saying yes. Starmer used an interesting phrase to describe what he wants: a more sophisticated relationship with China. Let's decode that. Sophisticated, in diplomatic speak, means complex, nuanced, able to compartmentalize. It means, we'll criticize you on human rights quietly, without real consequences while pursuing economic cooperation loudly, with great fanfare. It means we'll raise uncomfortable issues in private, without details while signing agreements in public. With photo opportunities, it means we'll pretend to maintain our values, while actually prioritizing our economic interests. That's not sophistication. That's moral flexibility dressed up in diplomatic language. She told Starmer that China would actively consider granting UK citizens visa-free entry. Note the language. Actively consider, not will grant, not agrees to. Actively consider. That's a maybe, a potential future possibility, something China might do if Britain continues to behave appropriately, and British officials are presenting this as a win. China has eased visa restrictions for multiple European countries in recent years. This isn't a special favor to Britain. It's part of Beijing's broader strategy to make Chinese tourism and business more attractive to Europeans. But Starmer gets to go home and claim he secured easier travel access for Britons, even though it's actually just China continuing a policy it was already implementing. For European nations, this is what desperation looks like at the highest levels of government. The conservative opposition has been scathing, calling Starmer's trip a kowtow to Xi and claiming Britain is receiving little in return. They're not wrong, but they're also hypocrites. It was conservative governments that pursued the golden era of China-UK relations. It was David Cameron who brought Xi to a pub and toasted to Anglo-Chinese friendship. It was conservative chancellors who opened Britain's markets to Chinese investment with minimal scrutiny. The Tories are criticizing Starmer for doing exactly what they did, only more desperately and with less leverage. The difference is that when the Conservatives courted China, they could at least pretend Britain was negotiating from strength. The special relationship with America was intact. The European Union provided additional leverage. The British economy was growing. Now, Trump is threatening tariffs. Brexit has severed European ties. The economy is stagnant, and Britain is alone. She's call for orderly multipolarity deserves special attention because it reveals China's actual strategy. Multipolarity sounds reasonable. It sounds like democracy applied to global governance. Multiple powers, each with influence, negotiating and cooperating. But what she actually means is a world where American power is diluted, where China has veto power over global decisions, where smaller nations must choose sides in a new Cold War, and where Beijing sets the rules for its sphere of influence. It's not about equality among nations. It's about replacing American hegemony with Chinese hegemony while calling it multipolarity. And European leaders, desperate for alternatives to an unreliable America, are walking right into it. Remember, she's warning about a jungle-like world if major powers don't respect international law. That phrase does enormous work. It's simultaneously a criticism of American behavior under Trump and a justification for Chinese power. The message is, without China and cooperative partners like Britain, the world descends into chaos. American unpredictability creates jungle conditions. Chinese stability offers the alternative. Its positioning. Beijing as the responsible adult in the room, while Washington throws tantrums about Greenland, and it's working. 3 hours in the Great Hall of the People. Banquets and bilateral talks. Warm smiles and constructive dialogue. And what did Britain actually achieve? Possible whisky tariff reductions, maybe easier visa access, vague promises of business deals, intelligence sharing on boat engines. In exchange, Britain has signaled its willingness to downgrade human rights concerns, minimize criticism of China's authoritarian governance, and accept Beijing's growing influence over British affairs. Jimmy Lai remains imprisoned. The 9 sanctioned parliamentarians remain sanctioned. Uyghur genocide continues. Hong Kong's freedoms keep eroding. But relations are in a good, strong place. This is what geopolitical decline looks like in real time. This is what happens when a former great power finds itself isolated, economically vulnerable, and desperate for friends. Britain bet on Brexit sovereignty and the special relationship with America. It lost both. Now, it's turning to China not as a partner, but as a lifeline. She knows this. That's why he could afford to take a swipe at the Conservatives while praising Labour's contributions to China-UK relations. That's why he could offer vague promises while extracting concrete concessions. Because Britain needs China far more than China needs Britain. The West is fracturing. Trump has made that inevitable. And into that fracture, China is stepping with offers of stability, economic cooperation, and orderly multipolarity. European nations are taking the bait. Starmer's visit is just the latest example. The special relationship is dead. The European alliance is weakened, and Britain is learning to range far its eye over long distances, looking toward Beijing rather than Washington. This isn't sophisticated diplomacy. This is the sound of an empire's final chapter being written in a foreign language, in a great hall built to showcase another power's dominance. A sign of auspiciousness, she called the visit. For China, absolutely. For Britain, that depends on whether you think trading your values for tariff cuts on whiskey is an auspicious bargain. Starmer thinks it is. History will judge whether he's right. But in that great hall, with those golden chandeliers casting light on centuries of imperial symbolism, the judgment seemed clear enough. Britain came to Beijing as a supplicant, and she welcomed them accordingly.